You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
Because of the following special program, Wonder Woman and the Incredible Hulk will not be presented this evening.
It's time to get all your Star Wars news in a single file. This is Making Tracks. Here are your hosts, Mark Newbold and Mark Mulcaster.
That's not true. That's impossible.
Hello and welcome to episode 96 of Making Tracks, brought to you by the fine folk over at fanfortracks.com. My name's Mark, I am one of your co-hosts, and this week, as always, I am joined by a Gen 1 Star Wars fan and a man who has written at least 165 more articles for Star Wars Insider than I have. It's Mr. Mark Newbold. Mark, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. To start you off, I think maybe you should do an article on like 5 things that you will find most interesting about Womp Rats.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Does a Womp Rat know what a bullseye is? Is a bullseye the same thing in the Star Wars galaxy as it is here? What would a bullseye look like on Tatooine? Do they have balls on Tatooine? I don't know. I don't know.
No. Okay. Yeah, no. To be honest, I don't know either. But you know, that's something that we can mull over and maybe have to do some research later on. Anyway, how's things with you generally? How's the week in Star Wars been for you? Because it seems like it's been a bit of a busy one.
It has, in terms of stuff coming into the house, which I know is something you always ask.
Of course.
Not a huge amount this week, but one thing did come through. Empire Strikes Back crew patch that I purchased online from Darren Simpson, and he had some original Empire Strikes Back crew patches, which as soon as I saw it, bearing in mind my tattoo on my right arm is the Vader in Flames tattoo, and this was the Empire Vader in Flames crew patch. Couldn't say no to that. So that was the biggie this week.
Yeah, I couldn't say no to it either, so I picked one up as well.
Oh, sweet.
Exactly. I mean, I figured to myself, it's not very often that I splurge for crew merch like that, partly because I think I have lots of friends who are massive Star Wars patch collectors, and this was a bit of a bragging right, really, because obviously they spend a lot of time and money and also effort trading in these patches, specifically kind of Rebel Legion and 501st patches and Mando Mercs patches and stuff like that from the fan groups. I thought, well, this is special. So it arrived Thursday evening, and I think I'm probably going to frame it because it just looks that nice. I'm going to mount it and then frame it and then put it next to my signed copy of The Force Awakens, I think.
Oh, very nice.
I'm waiting on a couple of waves of vintage figures that I think should be dropping on the doorstep maybe today, if not Monday, hopefully.
I'm Derek Arnold, and I get my news from Fantha Tracks.
2 weeks ago, you and me on Making Tracks mentioned, just in conversation, isn't it overdue that Carrie Fisher gets her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame? And 2 weeks later, someone somewhere must have heard the episode and decided, yes, you're absolutely right, Mark and Mark. Carrie Fisher should get a star on the Walk of Fame. And she is. The Hollywood Chambers Board of Directors held a meeting on the 14th of June. On the 16th of June, they ratified it. They're putting 38 people on the Walk of Fame, and 3 of them are Star Wars people that we love. Ewan McGregor, Ming-Na and Carrie Fisher. How awesome is that?
That's great. I think you mentioned, didn't you, about with Carrie's star anyway, I think there needs to be like a 5-year gap between when she passes away before they give her the honor posthumously. So that's just a real happy coincidence. I'm really stoked for Ewan and Ming-Na. And yeah, I think it'd be really fun to kind of go down there and start hopping over to the different stars belonging to Star Wars actors, because there's probably more there than you realise. Interesting list, though, when you think about it. And there's people on that list that I would have thought, like Francis Ford Coppola would have had a star by now. So I don't quite know what the criteria is for it, to be honest. I don't know if it's like just people just suggesting names or if there's like some kind of requirement. But there you go. So look forward to seeing them get placed on the walk very soon.
Yeah, exactly. They're the class of 2022. They've got 2 years to get their stars down. They're all organised individually. So as you say, when we know when and specifically where, because people love to go and see them and take pictures with the stars, we'll bring it to you on Fantha Tracks.
I'm Anthony Daniels, and you are listening to Fantha Tracks. Well done.
good news has come that later this year in 2021, Star Wars Visions will be coming to Disney Plus, which is news that I don't think we knew specifically. Were you aware it was coming 2021?
Really great news. So that's meant to be dropping later this year. The Anime Expo Lite is meant to be having like a sneak peek on Saturday, July 3rd, which hopefully will be something that will make its way onto the streaming platforms and that, and we can actually kind of have a good look and see what it's all about. Because to be honest, we don't really know a huge amount about Visions, barring the fact that it's animated shorts done by different directors and creators in that medium.
My gut tells me that Visions will be a little bit like... Do you ever watch Love, Death and Robots on Netflix?
No, but I've been told that I should.
You should. You really should. Absolutely brilliant. All very unique and individual. The style for each one is completely different. So no two episodes really look the same, and they're all standalone episodes. I think Star Wars Visions, from what I have sort of discerned from what's been said before, will be separate filmmakers making their own little Star Wars stories. Do you remember a few years back there was that anime-style TIE Fighter versus X-Wing short that came out that was just...
That fan-made one.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it was just amazing. Yeah. I'm kind of thinking, well, one week we'll get something in that style. Next week it'll be a full-on CG. The week after it'll be sort of a Katie Cook style type anime. I don't know. Got some real interesting stuff to look forward to. So, as you say, sneak peek. I don't think we're going to see a huge amount, but we are going to start seeing stuff from Star Wars Visions. On the subject of animation, and this was a wonderful surprise, boosting up to watch Bad Batch, Droids has arrived on Disney+.
Yes,
you must be thrilled, because this was your gateway drug to Star Wars, wasn't it?
I was, yes. Although I was so busy yesterday that I only got a chance to watch one episode, but I did luckily see the first episode, which is cool, because I don't actually even think I've even seen that first episode. They all kind of blend into each other a little bit. I was surprised, because I thought it was coming in July, so a little bit earlier than what we were expecting. I was really surprised, because the actual remastering of this onto Disney Plus looked really good. Yeah. A lot more vibrant. I think partly because I was comparing it to some dodgy VHS copy that I'd found on YouTube a few years ago.
Yeah.
The sound wasn't as amazing. To me anyway, the clarity wasn't there, but I thought overall you could get it, and it's really good.
One question occurs to me, and you might know this. You've mentioned that the visuals are nice and crisp. I watched the first sort of 5 minutes of the first episode. I'm going to watch the rest of it later today. Now it's out there and on Disney Plus. Do you think there's the potential, if they want to, and there's no reason why they would, because it's not like they're going to be making millions of dollars off 36-year-old episodes of Droids.
Yeah.
But do you think if at some point they wanted to remaster the sound or give it some extra boost in terms of the sound, or do you think that they would just want to leave it as a vintage Star Wars thing? You know, this is from our archives, take it or leave it sort of thing. What do you think?
I mean, I think it will come down to cost, but what I would more likely imagine is happening is, and we're seeing this more just with streaming services with like how it can basically switch between like an HD or a 4K or a 4K with HDR and all that, is that there might be some kind of improvement in the algorithms, and there might be some kind of on the fly audio mastering that might go on, because I mean basically it just sounds a little bit muffled in places, and I wonder, it's either come off a film or it's come off like a pneumatic tape, and it's probably actually only mono maybe to begin with, so again you don't have the width really. So if anything, it might be some kind of like improvement under the hood on the Disney Plus app, which would then basically affect all the old stuff, so like Gummy Bears and I don't know, the episodes of Golden Girls, which I know you've been banging on about being so great and amazing. You'll get the episodes, you've got to scan them in, or you've got to ingest them somehow, then you've got to do the work, and then you've got to export them, they've got to be QC checked, they've got to be uploaded to the server, they've got to be QC checked again, you know, so it's a lot of work just for a 23-minute show, which, I mean, obviously we're never going to likely to get the metrics on how many people are watching this, but probably, yeah, it's going to be a curiosity for, I would say, 95% of fans who may watch an episode and go, oh, okay, I kind of get the gist of it, and then maybe move on.
Yeah.
That's possibly the case, but who knows? It all depends upon the people who hold the content, so like obviously Disney and Lucasfilm, and whether or not they see any worth to it. But it's really nice that it's fair, and I think it ticks a box. When Disney Plus came on, we had a long list of things that we'd like them to be able to show us, and Droids and Ewoks was one of them. I think we're now basically just missing a full-length version of the holiday special, and a lot of the kind of behind-the-scenes making of documentaries and DVD extras and stuff, which, again, who knows, that might be something that somebody kind of just thinks, oh, actually, that would be quite fun to roll out next May the 4th.
It would be nice. It would be nice to think that all of that content will come into Star Wars, you know, all the old making-ofs and all the old behind-the-scenes and Beneath the Dome and stuff like that. I'd very much like to see all of that. One other thing I thought occurs is that back in the day when Blu-ray was the primary format, they took out the Yoda puppet that we talked about last week. and put in a CG Yoda, and Ewan McGregor wasn't so keen on that. He preferred the puppet in the room. But that being said, Lucasfilm were able to do that. I think they did it just before Episode 3 came out, put in a CG Yoda. If Phantom Menace had come out on Disney Plus, they could have changed that and just push the button on a Sunday night, at midnight, and on Monday morning people come and watch Phantom Menace and go, hang on, there's a CG Yoda instead of a puppet Yoda. Yeah. Do you think that they now that we're moving away from physical formats into streaming formats, and that you never actually own the film anymore, you rent it on a monthly basis, but it's never yours, which is probably how the studios like it, that gives them then the latitude, because you don't own the Phantom Menace, you're just paying to watch it. Do you think that gives them the latitude to make tweaks like that? Apparently, the new Blu-ray of Raiders, which will presumably at some point end up on Paramount Plus, they've redone the opticals, so the matte lines have gone, and apparently it looks like they've not redone anything, but they've just readjusted it so it lines up better, and apparently that looks fantastic. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's the way forward? One morning you wake up and go, hang on, that looks better, but it's changed. I never knew that was going to happen.
Do you know what? I wrestled with that because, again, we may have talked about this way last year when the 4K versions of Star Wars came out and Disney Plus first launched. And obviously they changed the grade. They redid the grade from the Blu-ray versions of the saga, basically regraded the prequel trilogy and stuff like that. Actually, it kind of takes a little bit of getting used to, because it's not what you're kind of used to viewing, depending upon where you kind of enter into your fandom. For some people, it doesn't really bother them. Obviously, for me, because I'm a colorist, I'm like, this stands out plain as day, this is a different grade, and some of it looked great and other parts didn't. As long as it's done with the director, and even the director of photography's kind of blessing, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because in theory, hopefully going to help to increase the longevity of the film. Stuff like optical kind of effects and stuff like that, that is a very just technical manual process. And that is the kind of stuff which it's definitely worth doing. And if you've got the negatives and you can go back and rebuild these effects, or even digitally just clean them up so you can get rid of the matte lines, then I don't necessarily see that as being a bad thing. Obviously, there are some purists who think that the film that was released on the release date is the film that we should watch and should only ever watch. I mean, you think about all the different other kind of director's cut. Just look at Star Wars with the original trilogy and how many iterations we've had since the first release, even between differences between dialogue and sound mixes and stuff like that, from the 35mm to the 70mm and Laserdisc and that. So it's very difficult, because when some stuff does get changed, it can irk like a small portion of the fan base, but as long as it doesn't detract and they're not really changing the essence of a story, then it's not necessarily a bad thing. Additions, for instance, like maybe the McClunky edit and even the CG rock that suddenly just appears in front of R2 in A New Hope, that was my watershed moment. That was where I think like Lucas kind of overstepped the line for me, because it was way too literal and the actual comp didn't particularly look very good. But then obviously all the other stuff they've ever done since really 97 with cleaning stuff up and that, I think pretty much always helped it. Everybody's going to have an opinion, I think.
Just one more thing before we move on. Jan Tosh in Droids, if you watch The Pirates and the Prince and all that sort of run of stories, he rides General Grievous's wheel bike in one episode. But now that Bad Batch is out, look at Jan when he's got his helmet off, and look at the red bandana around his head and tell me that's not Hunter's bandana from the Bad Batch.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I even noticed on the first episode, which is called The White Witch, they're off to the Boonta speeder races.
Yes.
That's what I'm really excited about. It's kind of going back, because I think Droids, more so than Ewoks, will give us these little hints as to where these initial kind of ideas and names and that kind of came from. Red bandanas all the way, I reckon.
Hey man, it's me, Kevin Smith, Star Wars fan, Fantha Tracks fan.
Book of Boba Fett is on everyone's mind at the moment. The shooting has finished. Ming-Na has handed out her crew presents, and Temuera Morrison is bathing in Polynesian spas in his hometown of Rotorua in New Zealand, talking about being away from what looks like an amazing place to live. For 7 months was filming the show. 7 months, that's a good chunk of time to be away filming a TV show, isn't it?
Yeah, 7 months does seem like a fair chunk of time. Do you reckon that's all Book of Boba Fett, or do we think possibly this could be Book of Boba Fett and maybe some of the time he spent filming the Mandalorian scenes from season 2?
That's a good point. I mean, I think, November last year is 7 months ago, isn't it, give or take? So I'm making assumptions.
Or even Mandalorian season 3.
Exactly. I think the end of season 2 was December time. They could have filmed those Book of Boba scenes really late on. My gut tells me that would have been done beforehand, but I don't know. That's just my supposition. Well, last week, when Ewan and Pedro Pascal were talking, Pedro said, I haven't started filming season 3. Well, he hasn't started filming season 3. That doesn't mean to say season 3 hasn't started filming. You know, I guess it comes down to how physically involved he as an actor is in the production, because we know there's 3 other stunt guys and stand-ins and such. So, you know, if there's an episode where Mando is not taking his helmet off, is Pedro Pascal genuinely, and without making an issue or a scene of it, is he needed physically on set when there's other performers, stunt performers and other actors who can do that? He's the voice of the Mandalorian and the face of the Mandalorian, but Mando don't take his helmet off that often. Is he giving 7 months of his year to the Mandalorian in the way that Temuera Morrison clearly has given 7 months of his year to the Book of Boba Fett? I can see Fett turning up in Ahsoka again. I can see him turning up in other shows. So it sounds like he's enjoyed it.
What, the spa? Yeah.
The spa, and the filming. But yes, the spa, certainly, yes. Well, how could he not enjoy that view?
Exactly. I mean, it's crazy. And actually, to be fair, looking at him, he looks in great shape as well. So he looks like he's lost a fair chunk of like his off-season weight for Book of Boba Fett. But I think you're right. I mean, it kind of also comes down to this notion that people in production and have kind of named for Book of Boba Fett as Mandalorian 2.5 because it's obviously going to be connected to the Mandalorian in some shape, way or form, but it's not obviously a continuation of the Mandalorian. It's like it's going to be its own separate thing. So it's going to be interesting to see what how that ties in, and you know, is it a loosely tie-in because obviously it's Boba Fett and he was in the Mandalorian, and it's Fennec Shand who's in the Mandalorian, or is it actually going to affect what we see in maybe season 3 of The Mandalorian? Because as you said, just because Pedro hasn't started filming doesn't mean it's not in production. They could be doing loads of stuff which we don't know.
I'm Gareth Edwards, and you're listening to Making Tracks on Fantha Tracks Radio.
Somewhere down the line, and we're not sure when, but there will be a Star Wars film project with Kevin Feige involved, and on writing duties is Michael Waldron. Now, he's currently involved in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. He's the showrunner on Loki, which is currently the world's #1 TV show, and awesome. If you haven't seen it, see it. We know very little. He himself says it's very early days, so there's not an awful lot to report. Knowing nothing more than what we've just said, where do you think this story is going to be? I mean, we've got nothing to go on other than what we've seen Waldron do in Loki. We haven't seen Multiverse of Madness because it's not until next year, but what we've seen in one episode of Loki and the sort of stuff that Feige does, the world building that Feige does, where do you think this one might be set?
That's such a big question. It could be anything. I mean, the question is whether or not the Feige and the Taika Waititi films will be connected, because then that will dictate a lot of that. Unless, of course, they do something really clever, which I don't know if Star Wars really works when it's really clever, but maybe they do something in 2 different, contrastingly different time periods. You know, one affects the other. That's if they want to go down the time thing. Lucasfilm might be like, well, surely that's just like what you're doing in Marvel. So no, we don't want to do that. We want to do something different. I think all it just means is they're at the spitballing idea stage, really, where they're probably going, can we do this? Is this possible? Are we allowed to discuss this? Can we talk about, you know, Yoda's first crush or something like that? And probably they're getting either like a, possibly from Lucasfilm, like just a general kind of like, okay. I mean, they must be having like initial conversations. I'm sure, just like you and me, if you were to ask us, if you were told you'll write and direct a Star Wars film, what do you want it to be about? But they've both got ideas. And I suppose the thing is also that you probably don't want to get too tied down to like the nitty gritty now, because you don't necessarily know how the Mandalorian is going to play out and how things are going to play out with, let's say, the High Republic era and anything else which is coming down the pike that we don't actually know about yet. So it's like you said in the article, it's quite a way off. So it's difficult to, you know, have any idea. Yeah. What about you? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's an impossible question, really, because there's nothing to judge it by or nothing to judge it against. But I think you're onto something in the sense of they're just starting to sketch it out. It's 2021 right now. Kevin Feige comes from a world where they're plotting Disney Plus and big screen Marvel stuff years ahead. I mean, Pablo Hidalgo said it years ago that they were plotting sort of 5 to 10 years ahead for Star Wars. If it ends up being the 3rd big screen movie, if they go back to doing a film every 2 years and they don't do Star Wars story type Solo and Rogue One type films in between, and you just get a Star Wars big screen movie every 2 years, then I think that gives them the capacity on Disney Plus to spin off from those films. They could be, I say exploited, that sounds like a negative thing, but it's supposed to be a positive thing. Those landmark big screen movies could be exploited in a way on Disney Plus comics and books that they've not really had a chance to do before. So if they do a Rogue Squadron movie 6 months later, there's a Rogue Squadron series on Disney Plus. The books come out. There's a comic series, and there's a Rogue Squadron mini Star Wars universe within the bigger universe. And that feels like the most obvious
sensible
of the three, because Rogue Squadron, it's either going to be original trilogy. You'd imagine it's either going to be original trilogy or sequel trilogy or somewhere in between.
Yeah.
It really is. It's going to be one of those. It can't be anything before Rogue One because there wasn't a Rogue Squadron before Rogue One. So it's got to be after that. With the Taika one, I think we agree that he's probably going to step back into the past. I think that's our gut feeling for the Taika one. And for this one, you mentioned time and such, linking those two stories together, which would feel like a very sort of Feige thing, given what he's done with Marvel, stretching through Captain America in the 40s right up to the present day and slightly beyond, really. If you go back to Dark Horse when they did the Vector storyline, the whole Rakghoul Plague thing and all that sort of stuff, they've sort of done it with the High Republic. You keep seeing elements of High Republic in modern, current, like Dr. Aphra and stuff like that, modern storylines, where they're just seeding that storyline into the modern stuff, modern being prequel, original, and sequel trilogy era, that 60-year stretch, just so it feels like a thing, and that they would refer to the High Republic like we would go, oh, the Dark Ages, or the Renaissance, or whatever period of history you want to describe. I think maybe you could do something where, Taika's story leaves a MacGuffin hanging over it that doesn't need to be resolved in that film because you're following a character, but then in Kevin Feige's film, 5,000 years later, they find the MacGuffin and it triggers off a whole nother adventure, and that's the driving element, but you're focusing on whatever the characters are. But given that they're just sort of sketching that now in 2021 doesn't mean this wouldn't be the 2027 film, so that's just spitballing. I mean, there's literally nothing more to go on than that.
I'm Corey D, and I get my Star Wars news from Panther Tracks.
Just as our wallets couldn't take any more purchasing of 50th anniversary Lucasfilm figures and more Black Series and more vintage collection figures, Hasbro has announced another plethora of figures coming to us very soon. And in fact, Panther Tracks had the scoop on a set of 3 Power of the Force figures. So that's the original, was it 1994-95 Cardiff figures with the orange kind of background with Vader, coming later this year. And we've got Luke Skywalker, Han Solo, and again Greedo. Really cool that you guys were able to get the exclusive on that.
Yeah, it was nice. It came through to us just last week, and obviously, like everything, it's top secret. Don't tell anyone, don't tell anybody you've got anything coming, because we don't want anybody to know. It worked out great. Us and a handful of other sites did the reveal, so it's nice to share that with some fellow fans. But yeah, those figures look great, and that packaging just really pops. Really like that.
Like I said, you've got like the Luke Skywalker, Farm Boy Luke, and then you've got Han Solo and Greedo from A New Hope. Luke has a soft goods white kimono type robe. But again, we got a Greedo figure with the earlier Star Wars kind of range for the 50th anniversaries. So it just seems like, did they not think there could have been another more interesting character rather than Greedo, or they're just kind of keeping it in that A&H like line?
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because that original wave really did go back to the classics. 95, wasn't it? It was still Kenner. I get them using Greedo because I think he was probably the most desirable of the characters to get back in the day as a kid. You wanted Greedo because he was the one that had the direct interaction with the characters, whereas Hammerhead and Walrus Man, all the other characters, Walrus Man certainly had a direct interaction with Luke Skywalker, or certainly the business end of Ben Kenobi's lightsaber. But, Greedo was the one that really had a proper scene. So I get that in that sense. And so I suppose from a business point of view, they've done the sculpt, the figures there. Let's pack him on this packaging for this release and pack him on this packaging for that. But they are both 50th anniversary releases. Yeah. So I can understand the grumbles there. That being said, it looks mighty fine to me. I think I'm probably going to hop onto these 3.
Definitely getting these. What these are, really, and I don't say this too negatively, but these feel like, like a Black Series repack, and I don't really pay huge amounts of attention to like what figures have been released on the Black Series and compare them in the same way as some other sites and stuff. But that's what these feel like. So these feel like a nice, easy way to just commemorate the fact that Lucasfilm has been here on the planet for the same amount of time as you have.
Oh, really. Thank you very much for that. Well, I do agree.
Just to remind you of that.
Senility's creeping in, so I do forget sometimes.
Carrying on with the Black Series scale of figures, Hasbro also announced 3 more figures. And these are kind of from the Bad Batch. And this time we've got Captain Rex and a 212th Battalion trooper, which is kind of like the dudes in yellow. Yeah. And then also a really mean and gritty looking Crosshair with his kind of like long blaster and stuff. So does that now complete? Have we got everybody from the Bad Batch on the Black Series scale?
I think we do. I hope this is the Imperial version of Crosshair. Have we had the original version of Crosshair? We've certainly had Wrecker, we've certainly had Hunter, we've definitely had Tech. Have we had Echo? I mean, a Bad Batch Echo with the sort of the Borg arm.
I don't think Borg. Yeah, I don't think we have. So yeah, there's probably still a few more in terms of the actual Bad Batch, Clone Force 99. Because Echo, like we pointed out before, is an add-on, isn't he? He's like the first hanger-on to them. And actually, you start to really see slight kind of connections between previous versions of Stormtroopers and Clone Troopers and stuff. So it's quite a nice progression.
I totally see that now.
Moving on and getting slightly smaller to the 3 3/4 inch. So Hasbro has just released a 4-pack of Clone Troopers under the Bad Batch banner with basically they've all come with their own vintage collection card backs. So it's an interesting selection, and I think a lot of people were a little bit disappointed by the fact that the first announcement for 3 3/4 inch Bad Batch figures wasn't any of a Bad Batch. And in fact, basically what we've got is Captain Rex from Bracca, so he's wearing his kind of, again, his soft goods kind of like poncho type gear, and Clone Captain Ballast, which is the dude in the green armor, which is basically from the first episode. Clone Captain Grey and an Elite Squad Trooper. So basically, if you love your clones, then you must be loving this 4-pack. But if you're kind of like most people who actually wanted some proper Bad Batch figures, you're a little bit disappointed. But hopefully that just means that these will be coming down the pipe later on. I mean, again, these are Amazon exclusives, so I think they sold out pretty much straight away. How they get over to the UK market, I am yet to find out.
Yeah, it's disappointing. I get why people would be grumbling about this for 2 reasons. Like you say, there's no member of the Bad Batch in a 4-pack that's called the Bad Batch, and the Bad Batch is a very specific, it's those guys and Omega. Okay, they didn't call it the Clone Force 99 pack and not put any of those characters in it, but calling it a Bad Batch pack. And they do say it's sort of inspired by the Bad Batch. This action figure 4-pack is inspired by the characters in Star Wars The Bad Batch. I think it's
a bit of a cop-out.
That's a stretch. It's a real stretch to sort of capitalise on the Bad Batch name. I don't think they needed to do that. I think they should have come up with something that was armour figures like this, unique-looking characters. They look fantastic, and on the card, they look lovely, and I love this old-school style packaging.
Yeah.
I think the one thing that it didn't need was to have the word Bad Batch attached to it. It would have sold great on its own. I think that's a misdirect. I don't think that's the smartest thing they've ever done, but the figures look lovely and they sold out in seconds. I want these. I think they're awesome.
Exactly. I do as well. Yeah. So I'm hoping they will make their way over to the UK in some shape, way, or form.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark FanthaTracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
So this week brought us the 8th episode of the first season of The Bad Batch. The episode was called Reunion for a very good reason. Lots of action, back on Bracca, as we were in the last episode with Captain Rex. Of course, Captain Rex left us at the end of Battle Scars. This episode, the Empire's come in, there's trouble afoot, and there is a reunion because Crosshair is in this episode, causing our good friends trouble. What did you make of this episode, Mark? I thought it was an absolute barnstormer.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was a stonking great episode and really dark as well. I mean, it's half time, isn't it? End of this episode was the midway point into the Bad Batch. So, leaving us on a cliffhanger, which is a good thing to do. Obviously, a slight misdirect, I think. I was almost thinking about by the end of this episode, we're going to clearly get a definitive Crosshair is not going to rejoin the Bad Batch, or he would have rejoined the Bad Batch by this episode. So this was a nice surprise. Overall, lots of action, and it was great fun kind of seeing them run around this derelict Jedi cruiser again. The big reveal at the end for Cad Bane, another Clone Wars character making his way into the Bad Batch. And it felt pretty natural. It didn't feel like it was too shoehorned in. It just felt like a pretty natural progression.
Yeah, I mean, we knew the Kaminoans wanted the Batch back. I think after the conversation that was had with Admiral Rampart, who's got no interest in bringing the Batch back. He just clearly wants to push on his agenda of enlisting people, which we talked about the other week about why that is actually probably a good idea for an empire building across the galaxy to lure in and to attract people from across the galaxy. Not a bad thing to do rather than limiting yourself to certain pockets of clone development areas like Kamino, like, hey, who knows, Exegol. There could be places all around the galaxy they're cloning, but they become targets. If you're enlisting from everywhere there's nowhere to hit. So that was a smart thing. The Kaminoans now really want to push their agenda of we've got to get these back. And I think this episode showed that their focus, their real intent is to get Omega back. And as you say, Cad Bane comes in. Another episode with a guest star, inverted commas, which I've noticed on social media this week. Some people have been criticising, and I don't entirely disagree with the criticism because it does make the galaxy feel very small that these things happen. So we knew Crosshair and the team would cross paths. That was a given. But for Cad Bane to come in, which was a really nice surprise when the camera started panning up and I was like, oh my God, it's Cad Bane. And then it was Cad Bane. That was a brilliant moment because I've always rated that character and wanted to see more of him. And I like the fact that we kind of haven't now. Now he's back, that we haven't because they've used him judiciously. He's got the reputation. For him to come in, for him to be the guy at the peak of his bounty hunting powers at this point made all the sense. It didn't feel like, oh, this is how they're shoehorning this guy in. It was like, oh, it's Cad Bane. That's awesome. It was really well played.
Yeah, that whole scene was basically, I think, a perfect example of the Western trope in Star Wars. Yeah. I mean, the Kevin Kiner music was just like the good, the bad, the ugly. It had everything that you would want from a Western soundtrack on that score.
Yeah.
Every single camera angle and the shot and the progression in the standoff and the shootout was textbook. You know, it was Sergio Leone, Spaghetti Western 101. Bringing Cad Bane back, he was such a cool character in the Clone Wars. Yeah. Corey Burton does such a great voice for him, and that little kind of annoying droid was there. But yes, I do see that criticism. They have to be a little bit careful. Could they have put another bounty hunter in its place, or would that have maybe made the galaxy feel even smaller? If you think of all the potential bounty hunters that they could have picked, you've got Cad Bane, Bosk, Dengar, 4 Lom, and Zuckuss. Those are probably like from the main bounty hunters out, I think.
Yeah.
Does Cad Bane necessarily, is he kind of one? I mean, because I probably wouldn't, name him in the first 5 anyway. I mean, because my mind would always go to the ones you basically see in Empire Strikes Back. But I suppose there's probably a finite amount of bounty hunters or decent bounty hunters that are going to get the reputation, because you'd imagine the Kaminoans aren't literally just putting out a broad call out to all the bounty hunters. They're specifically approaching people that they think can get the job done.
Yeah.
Reputation's going to play a lot into it.
I think Aura Singh's a good shout because she hasn't been pushed off a cliff by Beckett yet. That would work. I think Boba's probably still a bit too young at this point because your guess is roughly, I mean, how old was he in Attack of the Clones? You say he was 10 or 11? And he's aging at regular rate, and this is
It'd be like 18.
3 years later?
Yeah, or 16, maybe.
Yeah, maybe 15, 16.
Ish.
So maybe at the start of his career, possibly, but I don't think he'd be the threat that he was.
Yeah, exactly.
But those other characters, it makes sense because you always got the sense he was a bit old and battered. Bosk, certainly. Forlom and Zuckuss, quite possibly. I refuse to say for LOM, I'm sorry. I mean, I guess it gives them the opportunity, if they want to introduce other characters at earlier stages of the Star Wars timeline. So we know those guys from Empire Strikes Back, but you go back 20 years or 19 years to where Bad Batch is, or slightly more actually, because Empire's 3 years after Star Wars, so 20 plus years to Bad Batch. And you imagine that there would be other well-known, established, respected, feared bounty hunters of that time who, natural selection, getting bumped off, retiring because they've made enough, whatever, have just stepped away from the scene, like any scene at sports, or at some point Federer, Nadal and Djokovic are going to retire and a new batch of number ones are going to come through, sort of thing. So it's the same in the bounty hunting world. There was probably a guy back then who was like, oh man, do you remember, Lampshade, he was the best bounty hunter ever. I say Lampshade, I'm looking at a Lampshade. There'll be somebody that they could have introduced and made a big deal of, and then he gets knocked away because we've just got Fennec Shand come in, who's clearly good at a job because she was hired, but is it reasonably, you'd assume, I don't know, we might learn that Fennec Shand's 100 years old for all we know, but you're kind of assuming that she's fairly young. We're just assuming she's the same age as Ming-Na Wen, and we've just worked out the numbers, but there's nothing to say that she could be like Zam Wessel, she could be a shapeshifter for all we know. So
exactly,
could be some interesting surprises coming ahead there. But yeah, I really enjoyed the action. The action was great. You mentioned Kiner's music. Again, it's always on point. That sequence, I want to ask you a question. When Hunter was shot, given that there's no guarantees for any of these characters other than the obvious ones like Rex and ones that we know survive, for a second I thought, oh my God, he's killed Hunter. Did you think that for a second?
Yeah, genuinely did. I thought, okay, That would be really cool, because Hunter is basically the grounded one, and actually liked about this episode because it continues from the end of the last episode. You know, we're talking probably about maybe an hour or a couple of hours after Rex leaves. You know, Hunter's the one who's like, yeah, hang on a sec, we've got to get out of this bind with Sid before it really gets stuck. You know, so he's suddenly kind of going, right, now we need to now make a move. So that talk with Rex had an effect on him. He's obviously become, you know, had some time to think about the situation with Sid, and probably seeing that actually, a bit like with a loan shark, there's probably no real easy way out. So if you were to remove Hunter from that dynamic, then I think all of them will probably fall apart. You imagine Wrecker would just basically go on some kind of rampage. And I don't quite know that Tech is really that kind of...
Leader.
I don't think he has much. Yeah, he's not a leader. I don't necessarily know if he's got that much common sense. He points out the obvious, but I think he sometimes points out the obvious, but doesn't necessarily realise it's a threat. It's just like, oh yeah, the proximity alarm's sleeping.
Yes.
So it's probably a malfunction. And oh yeah, the engine's going to start up. That could have happened. Somebody with a bit of common sense would have maybe said that before they made their way to the thruster to escape. But it's like he keeps these kind of like this threat analysis to himself and then points it out of the most obvious point, which... I don't know if that's meant to be done for humour or not, but I'd start to get a little bit annoyed if I was Hunter, if that was the case by then.
Don't you think, though, with the batch, that it's all about balance and it's all about these...
Yeah.
You know,
exactly.
Amiga in this episode learning how to defuse a mine, and Wrecker's being quite patient. It's quite a funny little scene. It's quite patient with her. Do you think I'm really letting you work with live ammo and all that stuff? You know, she's starting to learn stuff, and the dynamic has changed because Crosshair's not part of the team, and clearly after this one, he ain't going to be part of the team because he ends up in quite a bad way at the end of it. The balance. So if Hunter had have been taken out, and he was lucky to survive that, really. He really was.
I think so.
And it's probably going to knock the wind out of him a little bit, but as you say, if he's out of the square, then Echo's not a leader in that. He's not an alpha clone in that sense. Whereas Hunter clearly is he's an organizer. He empathises, but he's firm when he needs to be and loose when he doesn't. Wrecker couldn't do it. You've just totally nailed Tech. And we were talking about Tech last week about how his character's not defined enough. And this episode gave us a little bit more of that detail, because like you say, sometimes the smartest people have the least common sense, and Tech is that guy, isn't he? It's like, you know everything. Why can't you put it together? Because it's right in your face, you know. It just feels again like Amiga getting involved when she starts shooting the arrow at the end when they do the distraction with the cannon. Crosshair's got them sort of pinned down. They're starting to give her the latitude, right, Amiga, you go and do this, you go and do that. She's not being sent back to the ship anymore, is she?
No, she's not. I really like the whole kind of disarming the mine and that, and it actually got me thinking when Wrecker said about how like he failed the first time, whether or not that's how he got that massive scar on the side of his head, because it wasn't maybe a smoke bomb, it was actually probably live munitions blew up in his face, quite literally. So there's one thing actually, on the second time I watched this through, I noticed again, and I don't know if this was intentional, and it probably was, again during the episode, Wrecker kind of hits his head, and I think it was kind of like a way to kind of say, oh yeah, he's hit his head, but you know, there's no chip anymore, so he's okay. But then a couple of times Crosshair kind of got it on the noggin as well. And there was me thinking that I wonder if maybe he gets a couple of hits on the head and his inhibitor chip starts to malfunction, and then actually he starts to question the loyalty thing. You know, it's interesting that we've kind of gone through the whole of the Clone Wars, and barring a couple of small examples that we've seen, you know, the inhibitor chips and, you know, these clones get blown like left, right and centre and like thrown against walls and stuff like that, but the inhibitor chips seem to kind of remain pretty stable. I wonder if actually maybe the inhibitor chip's going to malfunction with Crosshair and that's how he comes back. Or alternatively, the inhibitor chip does malfunction and it gets removed, and actually they realise and it turns out Crosshair didn't need the inhibitor chip all along. Actually, you know, he's where he's meant to be.
That would be a great twist, wouldn't it? Because and because we talked last week about how it's not dragging out plot lines, it introduces a problem and deals with it pretty much straight away, which is confident storytelling. And we think it feels very much like you just said we're halfway through season 1 already. I can't believe that. And it feels like they know completely where they're going with season 1, that they sat down and gone, right, we're going to do this story is 16 episodes and this is episode 1 and this is episode 2, and they've plotted it. I know that probably sounds like really obvious and patronising to say. I don't think that's been the case in the past necessarily. I think sometimes they've just kind of done it on the fly. This time, it feels very much like they've gone, right, we start at this point and we end up at this point in episode 16. And here we are, moving forward through the storyline. Yes, I think Crosshair's still got his chip because they amplified it. I think the twist could be exactly what you said. I half expected it in this episode. I thought they were going to ambush him, capture him, take the chip out, and they didn't get the opportunity to do it. I really thought that was what was going to happen as I was watching it. But I think you're right. I think you could have a sequence where they take the chip out and he comes around and they're like, Crosshair, are you okay? And the first thing he does is pulls the gun at them and says, good soldiers follow orders, because good soldiers do follow orders. In their world, they do. And so I think you could be right. I think they could take the chip out and that's just who he is. It's just dialed him up a little bit. It's the old Stone Cold Steve Austin. It's the real guy just dialed up a little bit. I think Crosshair could be that guy, loyal to the cause of whatever he follows. You might hit on something there.
It's one of those things, isn't it, with Bad Batch, that you kind of think, oh my God, there's lots in this, but there's not lots in this as well.
Yes.
It feels like plotted it out nicely so that enough happens in each episode to keep the story moving, but it's not massive reveals each time. And I think we could probably look back at the end of the season and kind of go, oh my God, wow. It all kind of starts to slowly fit.
When you look at the plot and what's happening on screen, there's nothing outstandingly unique, and there's not an awful lot happens each episode. But if we'd have done our Bad Batch reviews as a standalone podcast, we could do a 40-minute episode comfortably.
Exactly.
There's a lot happening. Perfect episodic television.
I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, and you are following Fantha Tracks.
We have another listener's question, Mark, and it's a really good one, and it's so relevant to what we've just spoken about. We thought this episode we'd flip it, so we do the listener's question last. And it is from Becca Benjamin, who you will know from Tolkien's Top Shelf, Kanata's Castle, and also...
Good old Becca.
Exactly. Also writing for us here at Fantha Tracks. So here is Becca's question. It's perfectly well timed. Do you think there's a possibility that Omega might be destined for more, character/role-wise? For instance, any thoughts on whether or not she could play a pivotal part in the Book of Boba Fett? That's a really good question. So straight into it, mate. What do you think?
I guess we're probably going to have a better idea of what her fate's going to be by the end of the season, which is a bit of a cop-out kind of answer from me, to be fair, because there's so much stuff going on with her, I think, that actually, you know, on one level, it's very easy to dismiss her as like, you know, the kid in the Bad Batch. But actually, she's learning and she's developing and she's growing as a trooper, as she's being trained by Wrecker and the other guys, you know, and she's also kind of getting her head around what the galaxy is truly like, having lived on Kamino for the last however many years she's been around for. It would be fantastic if actually, yes, she did turn up in the Book of Boba Fett or another series later on down the line, especially if it's live action, and she's got this totally crazy kind of like kick-ass job, and maybe she's a bounty hunter or something like that. Maybe that is where her kind of training's leading her almost. She's got to be some kind of crack commando.
There's lots of options for Omega, I think, because at the moment she's such an innocent and she's seeing all these things for the first time, like this episode, so smoke bombs, like she'd never seen the smoke bomb, or there's lots of things she hasn't seen for the first time, different things that are completely new to her. Anything that's not on Kamino is pretty much new to her. So she's an innocent. She's clicked and connected to these characters. You want her to progress, to do something positive, to make something good of herself. I think, especially with clone characters, and I'm thinking specifically of Boba, they're kind of almost trained to imprint on things. They're not bred to be independent and they're not bred to be individual. They're bred to follow orders. Because Omega's now in with these guys and she wants to be part of that team and wants to learn and be her own person, that the environment she's living in, which is at the moment sort of a very mercenary, living on the run, there's no opulence in their world at the moment. And I want good things for the character, but I wanted good things for Anakin. I mean, if I'd have seen episode 1 and not seen the others, I would have been kind of like, oh no, this poor kid. And with Omega, you know, okay, you're not going to go down the Darth Vader line, but it wouldn't surprise me if she got into the world that they're living in to the degree, unless they go and join Rex and fight for justice and peace and blah, blah, blah. But even then, they're living in the trenches. That more underworld, got to do what you got to do kind of attitude could become a prevalent thing.
There's a part of me that thinks that maybe she's in this environment at the moment where, in this episode, obviously through survival and probably through instinct, like the fight or flight instinct, you know, she dispatches one of those clone troopers like without really hesitating. She just pulls back and whack, he's gone. What's interesting is that for a lot of the time, Bad Batch tend to try and stun. Where people like with the scrappers, for instance, they tried to stun each of those scrappers as they're escaping, and kind of think that the poor guy at the end who was kind of like was fleeing, when he gets hit by the stun bomb and gets flown off of the edge of that cruiser, he's not coming back. No. You know, at least it's implying that they're not trying to take lives. One assumes that blaster bow, kind of that energy bow, is low powered enough that it's probably only set to stun. But you wonder the cumulative effect of all this peripheral violence. And I think we even talked about this with respect to Grogu, actually, and how he could develop being in with a Mandalorian and seeing all that violence. part of me thinks that Omega's got that innate empathy about her that actually maybe she might even make a choice and say, you know what, can't keep on living in this kind of life where I'm having to constantly fight people just to survive. I wonder if maybe she's more of a healer, or where she was kind of on Camino. A lot of people, and I'll be curious to get your take on this, a lot of people still think she could be force sensitive. Do you think that is possibly a really likely kind of like direction that she could go in, or is that just maybe a bit of a misdirect by the creators at this point?
The misdirects are always good because they keep people like us talking and tuning in every week. I mean, I don't know what the rules, inverted commas, are for clones and the Force. I mean, it was always the thing with Vader that he couldn't do Force lightning because he didn't have his own limbs and such. So there's lots of little things that you kind of picked up over the years. I would be surprised if she was. But one thing I do think could happen with Omega as a character is, that scene in the last episode right at the end when Rex and Hunter were talking, and obviously Rex has got more experience. Rex has been out there longer and such than Hunter. But nevertheless, I kind of saw those as equals to a degree. Hunter's not as old as Rex, probably. Rex has been out and seen more and worked with the greats, if you want to put it in those terms, like Ahsoka and Anakin and Obi-Wan and so on and so forth. So he's got all the experience you could hope for. But I kind of saw them as equals. So I sort of see Hunter as a Captain Rex kind of character in the dynamic of that group. Mm-hmm. I could also see Omega growing older, and I hope we physically see her get older as the show progresses. You know how Rex was to Ahsoka? He was her number one. She was Captain Picard, he was Riker, and so he was in charge of everything else, but Ahsoka was the boss. I can kind of see Omega growing and progressing to the point where she becomes the head of Clone Force 99, and Rex is the captain of that unit, but she's the one saying, well, next we're going to Nal Hutta, and then we're going to Scarif, and then we go to Tatooine or whatever, and just being in charge of them because she seems to be developing. I mean, she had the little exchange with Crosshair. I told you before when we were in the cell, this isn't your fault. And he pauses for a second. They know that she gets them. Even Crosshair, they all know that she kind of gets them. She's learning skills. She's around tech, so she's picking stuff up from tech. Hunter is kind of like the tracker skill. She just went from one part of that massive cruiser and found her way to the bridge. It's not like it's signposted. It's not like there's people you can ask the way. She knew the way. So she's intuitive in that sense. So she's picking up tracker type skills from Hunter. She's picking up technical stuff from Tech. Echo's kind of the grounded, sensible one. I would say he's kind of fairly well-rounded as well. She doesn't seem to spend as much time with Echo, but Wrecker, there's obviously a bond, and it's also Omega keeps Wrecker calm because he's like a Springer Spaniel of the group, isn't he? That's just bouncing around full of energy. Yeah. So she covers a lot of bases in that sense, and I could see her progressing as the years go on or the months go on or whatever to being the brains of the outfit, and the other guys are like, they know she gets it, so they'll follow her lead. I mean, she could go in any direction. I think there could be heartbreak ahead.
That's the thing. She could go in so many different directions, and I do think it's really difficult to kind of put a finger on it because obviously we know that animated characters can make their way into live action.
Yeah.
But I think part of it's got to come down to how fans react. Ahsoka had a lot of goodwill over not just one season, but multiple seasons over a long period of time. So she's built up a following and fan base or a reputation and stuff. The question kind of comes down to, in a practical sense, Star Wars fans like me, you and Becca, for instance, we all consume everything from Star Wars. But then there's a portion of people who will probably watch Mandalorian and watch the Book of Boba Fett because it's live action, but won't dip their toes into the animation because they're either not into animation or they think it's kiddie or whatever reason. And so you kind of think, well, maybe you've got to kind of slightly seed the fan base over a bit more time, let things gestate. As characters go, I think there's got to be something more to her. I think in some respects, if you're going to create a character like Omega, a bit like with Ezra, you're probably then going to want to do something with them later so that they have a longevity beyond the Bad Batch, whatever that is. If it's one season or if it's multiple seasons. So.
And that feels like a Filoni type thing, doesn't it? Ultimately, it's Favloni. It's Filoni's decision because it very much feels like he's running the story narrative now with certain characters. If he thinks, I'm going to introduce Omega in the Bad Batch, so everybody thinks of her as a Bad Batcher, but quietly in the background, I've already cast another actress to play her in live action, and she'll actually be majorly in the Mandalorian era, is where she's really at her best. And this is the backstory, whereas they've done it back to front with Fennec.
Exactly.
You saw her on screen in first and second season, and then Book of Boba Fett is to come, but we've now gone back to too early on. I think there could be like another War of the Bounty Hunters type scenario coming up in Bad Batch when they're all fighting to get Omega because they've got to know the value of her now that Cad Bane's got her.
Exactly. The fact that Cad Bane's got her means that she's got value. And we still don't necessarily know exactly what the plans are for her with the Kaminoans as well. It kind of comes back to a conversation we had last week about the films and how they need to tie into Disney Plus series and stuff like that. It's like you just think maybe on that granular level, there's got to be conversations about how can we move characters from one property into another series and do it in a way that's going to feel natural and transparent. Well, thanks for the question, Becca. That was really appreciated, and it was a stonkingly good question, which actually, to be fair, is what we'd expect from somebody like Becca, because she really knows her Star Wars. So if you want to be like Becca, and if you'd like to send us a question, then that would be amazing, because it gives me and Mark a chance to talk about all manners of stuff, and a lot of Star Wars stuff that we don't necessarily think about on a regular basis. And you can do that, how? How can you do that? How can you get in touch with us? That is the question, and it's the question that I don't have the answer to.
Okay.
But Mr. Newbold does.
Okay, well, I'll see what I can do. I'll do my very best. Yes, thank you, Becca. It was a really good question that got us thinking and stuff. If you want to be part of the action and stay updated on all the latest Star Wars news, visit fanthatracks.com or check out the free Fantha Tracks app through the App Store to follow us on your mobile device. That was a good one. You can reach out to us and send in your listeners' questions by emailing radio@fanthatracks.com. More questions about whatever's going on right now, way in the past, what might come in the future, anything, we'll talk about it. Comment, like and share on any of our social media feeds at Fantha Tracks, and be sure to subscribe, leave a review on Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, or your podcatcher or smart speaker of choice. And as always, thanks to James Semple for composing the Fantha Tracks intro, Adam O'Brien for our Making Tracks opening music, and Mark Daniel and Vanessa Marshall for our voiceovers. Now, this week we've had 2 episodes. We have our Pride episode, which has just come out. Tune in and listen to that. Mark will be appearing on Good Morning Tatooine, which is live Sunday evenings, 9 p.m. UK, 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific on Facebook and YouTube. So go back and watch Good Morning Tatooine. Go back and listen to our Pride episode. And that's me done for the episode, I think.
I think it is. Well done, dude. As always, well read, just about. At least better than me. Yeah. So, well, look, have a good week. I will catch you at episode 97. Everybody else, obviously, thank you for listening. We do appreciate it. And of course, as always, Fantha Tracks, Making Tracks, completely free. There's no Patreon subscription. We're not going to give you a hard sell. It's just Star Wars 24/7. With that in mind, you have fun, have a great week, wear a mask, get vaccinated if you haven't already, and may the Force be with you.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Desert Planet Discs.